Alright, so we're about to jump into an unbelievable video. The best way to prepare for the SAT is to take full practice SATs and review them. And what I want to do with you right now is do just that. So I'm going to have you take real SAT 7 in its entirety, or at the very least the reading section, which is going to be the topic of today's video, or at the very least the first passage of the reading section, which is going to be what we begin with right now. So if you haven't done that, in a second I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do it. And what we're going to do after that is I'm going to go over that section, show you the correct answers, why each of the answers is wrong, the methodology and mentality behind it, the strategies that I've developed over years of teaching this stuff. So this is something that I usually charge, obviously, hundreds of dollars for. So if you're getting this for free, then you definitely want to take a second, pause the video now, do at least the first passage of Test SAT Real 7, which I put a link to in the description of this video, and then we're going to go over it together, so I'll see you back here. Alright, so passage number 1, alright? So the first lesson that you can take away from passage number 1, and again, if you haven't done this, then you got to stop the video, do it now, but the first lesson you can take away from passage number 1 is that it is essential to read that bit over there. It is essential to read the description. So over here what it says is that Silas was a weaver and a miser, but the gold he had hoarded was stolen, and shortly after he adopted a young child. So if you haven't read that, then hopefully everything's just becoming super clear right now. You're like, oh my god, I definitely need to read that. So every time I see this, 4 times out of 5, the content of this is going to be completely irrelevant. You're not going to care about it. But for that 1 out of 5 times that it is relevant, it becomes even more essential that you read it. So make sure that you're reading it because that's very, very important. All right. Now let's just jump right into the questions. Now question number 1 asks for the main theme of the passage. The main theme of the passage question I would like to do last, and I think obviously so. What could possibly be in our best interest to do this one first? So what I'll do is I'll start and I'll do it at the end of the passage. And if you got it wrong, you probably chose maybe the moral purity of young children is a very common answer, and I'm not sure why. I think moral purity, young children, there's a child in it, right? She's very pure, but that's not the answer. And if I asked you, what I would say is summarize right now the main idea of the passage in your own words, and you'd probably say something like, even if you didn't fully understand the passage, he has the child, he adopts her, and she changes him. She makes him feel better. Maybe you realize that, right? So Silas is the main idea, so you can't have a choice that doesn't say that. It has to be something that relates to him, and it's the restorative power of parental love. The way that the love restored him, made his life better. Okay? Some people maybe chose the bittersweet brevity of childhood, naivete, or something like that. They don't know what naivete means, or bittersweet, not the point. All right? Second question. As compared with Silas's gold, Epi is portrayed as having more. Now, I call this question a no-line question. Number 2, no line, because there is no line in the passage that in the question to direct us to the passage about where to look. And the good thing about this kind of question is that once we know where to look, answering it correctly becomes extraordinarily easy. Okay, so because there's no line, it becomes very, very easy to answer it correctly. So we need to find a line that compares Silas's gold with Epi, and you find it in the first sentence. Unlike the gold which needed nothing and must be worshipped in solitude. Now this is parenthetical, you could skip it. Epi was a creature of endless claims, desires, seeking love, sunshine, living, and living moments. Okay, now back to the question, we're looking for something about Epi, compared to the gold, Epi. So these are describing Epi. A lot of people that get it wrong choose D, self-sufficiency, and I'm not sure why. It's the gold which needs nothing, which is self-sufficient. We're looking for a description of Epi. Now maybe you don't know what vitality means. Or maybe you think that the father pays more attention to protecting Epi. And I understand why you would think that. But if you look in this line, it's Epi has love, sunshine, living, right? Vitality means being alive, living. You'll talk about someone's vital signs, right? That's their heartbeat, the signs that show that they are alive. So that's that. You're gonna want to know that. And all right, number 3. Number 3 also doesn't have a line, so if you do find the correct instance, you will get it right easily. And the question asks, for a technique, a literary technique that the narrator uses to represent Silas's character before he adopted Epi. Now, it has to be somewhere here before he adopts, right? The gold had kept his thoughts. What does it mean it had kept his thoughts in a circle, right? And then you have more, the gold had asked. Could the gold really ask of something of him? The gold doesn't really ask of anything. That's called personification, right? You don't have to know the literal word for the SAT, but you definitely want to understand that idea. And you would say then that the narrators emphasizes his obsession with the wealth by depicting his gold as requiring behaviors on his part that the gold asked, the gold had kept, giving it personality. So that's the right answer. Number 4 is an easy question. I think most students get it right. I'm making a trial of everything in line number 4. That Epi was, he's a, where does it say that? In line number 7. Epi was a making trial of everything with trust and joy. Making trial of everything means that he was, making everything into a mini experiment for him, to have fun. Or for her, I'm not sure. So she's very curious, and I think that should be easy. Now, number 5, according to the narrator, one consequence of Silas adopting Epi is that he. Now, if you are still doing question number 5, and then only once you turn the page finding the second of the double questions and be like, oh, it was a double, I just realized, right? Then you're doing something wrong. So I'm going to give you my first strategy for double questions. Before you do the passage, you should go through the passage and star the first in the set of double questions. This first question in the pair of 2, right, where there's going to be a line question that follows it related to the first one. You need to know that they're together so you can do them in a pair. Step number 1. Okay. Now, that takes so much time. No. What takes so much time is doing question number 5, spending a lot of time trying to do it, then realizing there's a line in 6 and having to redo it. That's a waste of time. Okay. So you definitely want to do that. Step number 1. So now we get to question number 5, and we know that reinforcement is coming in question number 6. So we read question number 5. This is step 2, and understand it. One consequence of Silas adopting Epi. So we're looking for a result of Silas adopting Epi. Now, a very big misunderstanding that I've seen is people think that a consequence has to be negative. Consequence doesn't. It's just a result. Okay, so that's something you have to know. So now you go to the lines, and you want to see which one discusses a consequence of him adopting him, right? The 9 to 11 is obviously not the answer. Choice A, the gold has kept his thoughts in a circle. This one, but Epi was an object of change and hopes that forced his thoughts onwards and carried them forwards to new things. So is this a consequence of him adopting her? Yeah, probably, right? It forced his thoughts onwards. 41 to 43, just to look at it. Then she would turn her ear, and Silas learned to please her by making signs of silliness. So some people say, oh, look at the consequence. He learned to please her. Okay, that's not such a severe consequence. In 61 to 63, for Epi's eyes and ears, there was no more that Dad was imperatively required to notice and account for. So again, he has to notice her or something. Now, the first one was really the one that forced his thoughts onwards and carried them far away to new things. And if you look at question number 5 now, so now you go back and do number 5, and you'll see that forced his thoughts onwards to new things looks forward to a different kind of future. Okay, so that's number 5. All right, let's go to number 7. What function does the second paragraph serve in the passage as a whole? So that's on the other side of the page. And the paragraph that they're pointing to is this one here, that as the sunshine grew strong and lasting. It's a paragraph that happens outdoors. Now, people that get it wrong generally choose choice A, that it was a particular moment that Silas realized Epi was changing him. This would imply that it's one moment, and there's hints that that's not the case. That he might be seen in the midday, or in the afternoon, or the shadows. This is a series of moments. It's like a montage of different moments that come together, and that's why the answer is going to be that it illustrates the effect that Epi had on him by showing an interaction between them. Okay, number 8, in describing the relationship between Epi and Silas, the narrator draws a connection between Epi's. So now 8 is also part of a pair of double questions. Okay, so you want to see that. And what you're going to do, step 1, like I said, is to summarize question 8. Now, the narrator draws a connection between Epi's, I don't really understand the question, so I'll read the choices. Between Epi's physical vulnerability and Silas's emotional fragility. Between Epi's expanding awareness and Silas's increasing engagement. Between Epi's energy and... Okay, now I understand it. Comparing Epi and Silas together, we want a line that does that side by side. So let's look at the choices and see what we get. 1 to 9, unlike the gold which needed nothing, epi, this compares the gold to epi, right? So while that could seem like it's right, it's not as convincing as I would like it to be. The next one, right, the next choice, 30 to 41, is their interaction together in nature. Now, some people thought that since they're both in the scene that this is a good choice, but it doesn't really side-by-side compare them. When you see it, the right answer, you'll really look. So let's look at D 53 to 57, the correct answer for number 9. As the child's mind was growing into knowledge, his mind was growing into memory. See the side-by-side? As her life unfolded, his soul, long stupefied, was unfolding too into full consciousness. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now let's go back and try to do 8. Some of you would still choose maybe Epi's physical growth, because that's good, as her life unfolded, and his painful perception of his own mortality, because his soul, which was imprisoned, was trembling, right? But perception of his own mortality means his awareness that he was going to die, and that's really not what's happening here. So, you know, his soul is unfolding, trembling because it's new, but into full consciousness is a positive thing. So it's her expanding awareness and his increasing engagement with life for question number 8. Okay, and question number 9 we got. And question number 10, to finish it off, as used in line 65, find most nearly means. You go to the line. What I like to say is just figure out in your own words. She developed a fine capacity for mischief. In your own words, not you're going to yell out at me, acceptable. No, don't yell out a choice to me. In your own words. She was good at mischief, right? Now, acceptable means that we want her to be good and she reached that level. That's not the point. We don't want her to be good at mischief. Now, the reason you guys chose A, if you did, is because you couldn't choose between ornate and keen. You don't know what those words mean. Ornate means, very fancy, Great Gatsby's parties, if you're reading that this year, were very ornate. Keen means sharp or strong. You have keen eyesight, keen vision. So a keen capacity for mischief. It was very good at mischief. All right, so that's the end of passage number 1. If you just did passage number 1, you should now turn to passage number 2. Do passage number 2, and then we're going to continue with real SAT number 7, passage number 2. Okay, passage number 2 on real SAT 7, description in the bio. Let's jump in. So first of all, again, we said last passage we definitely want to be reading the top, how technology is destroying jobs. That's obviously seems like that could be important, right? It's something that seems like we would probably want to know about that. And it's a pretty easy passage. I think most of you would be able to read it and comprehend it somewhat well. So main purpose of the passage, again, we do it last, but assess the impact of the advancement on overall job growth. Okay, 12 and 13 is a set of double questions. We want to know what the results of the advancements in technology since 2000 have been according to these two guys. We're going to go to the lines first. Go to the lines. 1 to 6. You got the two guys. They argue that advances in technology are largely behind the sluggish employment growth. So that's a result. Sluggish employment growth. Sluggish employment growth. Growth is growing sluggishly, though. So 13 choice A, and 12, low job growth in the United States. Okay. Number 14. Primary purpose of lines 26 to 28. This is important. This is a purpose, a why question, and it's asking why about lines 26 to lines 28. It's this parenthetical bit here. So you always start a little bit before. In economics, productivity, the amount of economic value created for a given unit of input. This is the definition of productivity. So they're just defining a term or explaining a term. Okay, so that's that. As used in line 35, clear most nearly means. So the pattern is clear. In my own words, the pattern is obvious, or the pattern is unmistakable. Okay. 16 is part of a double question. I know that, right? So you would have that starred. Which of the following best characterizes his attitude towards today's digital technology? So for those of you that got 16 wrong, it's because you ignored the word today's digital technologies and chose the wrong choice for 17. So what you did for 17 is you either chose B or C. Let's look at B or C for 17. B, 73 to 75. While it can take decades for workers to acquire the expertise needed for new employment, we have never run out of jobs. So what you said is if we never run out of jobs, he must, for number 16, be unconcerned, right? He's unconcerned because we've never run out of jobs. The other choice that you might have chose for 17 is that people always come up with new things to do. Again, he's unconcerned. For those of you that said that he's optimistic that they'll spur job creation, that's the opposite of what he says for 16, so I'm not sure why people did that. The correct answer for number 17 is choice D, that if technology disrupts enough, who knows what will happen, right? That he is uncertain, and that's made even more clear in this passage at other times. Still, Katz doesn't dismiss the notion that there's something different about today's digital technologies, right? That maybe these technologies are different. Just to give you a little bit of a background on what the concept of this story, right, is the idea, and you probably hear a lot about this, you're watching this video online, that jobs are slowly going to go away because of technology. It's possible, right? One of our missions as society, let's say, is to make food. Well, what if the machines make food? Or maybe our mission is to teach, but what if the machines allow just a few teachers to teach everybody? Or what if the phones are being made? And now as a society we have so much wealth, so much production, but as individuals we don't have jobs. And what would happen then, right? And probably violence, and probably wouldn't be good. And it's our job as a society to figure out how to disperse the resources. So capitalists might argue, no, people will find things to do. But some people might say, look, maybe there just isn't anything to do. And it's a debate that could be had, and there's smart things to be said on both sides. Maybe you want to listen to ideas about universal basic income, and this is just to make you a little bit more cultured, so that I could feel like my job of preparing you for this test has a little more meaning than just that. Question number 18. In line 83, range most nearly means. So something that could affect an even broader range of work. In my own words, a larger amount of work. So most of you picked region, that got it wrong. Even a larger region of work. Too literally, it doesn't work like that. Distance position is no good, so scope. The way that I could explain scope is you have a telescope and you can only see certain things. You might want to expand the scope so more things are included. In legal terminology, there is this idea of beyond the scope of the witness, or beyond the scope of the case, that you're asking something that's really outside of the scope. The soliloquy I just went on, right? Maybe that was outside of the scope of SAT prep, or maybe I expanded it, the scope, right? So that's how you use it. 19 asks about the graph. The graph is an interesting graph. It's actually discussed outright in the passage. It shows how generally productivity and employment go up together. So as we become more productive as a society, it's because of probably rises in employment, or it goes hand in hand. But what's been happening lately, we see that the gap has been widening. And the time where it's widest was probably 2010, but of the choices they give is 2013. 20, number 20 I think is a fine question. The country with the greatest growth in output from 1960 to 1990 was Germany. That's just not always true. What about 1990, where Japan had more? Japan experienced the smallest increase from 2000 to 2011. Is just not true. Germany had less growth. Each of the three countries experienced an increase in output per worker. This is all about output per worker, and yes, each of them has seen increases in output per worker. So that's the answer. Number 21 is definitely a hard question. I actually got this one wrong, so I'm disputing the question. I don't understand what they want, but they say looking at this graph and at the quote on line 57 to 60. So the quote says, productivity is at record levels. Innovation has never been faster, and yet at the same time we have falling median income and fewer jobs. So falling median income and fewer jobs. So the graph shows that productivity is increasing, but what would help us evaluate the statement? So I said, and maybe a lot of you said, the median income. Now you should realize that there's something wrong with this choice, and I realize, I'm not shocked to find that it's incorrect, because in a single year wouldn't be helpful. If they tell us the median income in just 1970, how is that going to help me figure out if the median income has been rising or falling, right? So, but B, the number of people employed from 60 to 2011, I think they're giving me one number, the total from 1960 to 2011. I don't see how that could be useful. If you do, please message me, send me a voice note or something like that. I taught this to 100 and something students just the other day, and no one was able to explain it to me. So hopefully one of you will be able to. And that wraps it up for passage number 2. All right, if you haven't done passage number 3, then get to that right now. All right, and we're going to dive right into it. Passage number 3, Real SAT 7, description and bio. Make sure you do it before we do it together. No point in just watching me. Probably better than the other videos you watch, but do it. So this third passage here is a science passage. It's actually somewhat interesting. The other day I was driving to a concert in Philadelphia. I live in New York, and I saw the birds flying overhead, in their perfect formation, and I was in awe, and how do they know where to go, and what's going on here? And that's what this passage is about. Now, the reason that I'm telling you this is to be a little bit relatable, but also to show you that in order to not be bored to death by these passages, sometimes you just need to frame it in a way that makes it interesting. We know a lot of this is about strategies and about getting smarter, but also there's an element of just being interested and being able to read and having that mental stamina, and maybe that trick will help you. All right, so let's jump into this passage. Why do birds fly in a V formation? So 22, the main purpose. Again, we do this one last, but we'll do it together first, just so I don't forget. And the answer is explain research conducted to study why some birds fly in V formation. I think most of you probably got that right. Okay. 23, air gets unpredictable behind flappy wings. This is very similar to the question that we just looked at with the parenthetical quote that was defining a term. They have a quote here. Why have the quote? You always look a little bit before, and look what they're talking about. Models that treated flapping birds like fixed-wings airplanes estimate that they save energy by drafting off each other. But currents created by airplanes are more stable than the eddies coming off a bird. Air gets unpredictable behind the wing. All of this is designed to prove that the thing coming off the bird is different than that coming off the airplane. So for 23, the currents created by a bird differ from that of coming off an airplane. Okay. 24 and 25 are a pair of double questions. Step 1, know that they're a pair. This one, they're easy, they're on the same page. Step number 2, read and understand 24. What can be inferred, inference, not stated straight out, about the reasons that he uses the bald ibises? And be very specific. Why the ipsis? Why do you choose that bird? Why not a geese or a pelican or any other bird? Why that one? All right. Now, a lot of you for 25 chose 3 to 7, that choice A, that a new study of ipsises finds that these birds carefully position their wingtips to catch the preceding bird's updraft and save energy during the flight. A lot of you chose that. Okay. Now, this is the results of the study. It's not saying why they chose the ipsis. The one that actually does hit on it is the study took advantage of an existing study to reintroduce endangered species to Europe. Now, what does that mean? Took advantage of an existing study. Well, they were already doing a study with these birds, and this just layered on top nicely. They already had access to these birds. So the ipsises were easily accessible to his team because they were already being used in a study. So 24D and 25C. Okay. Next. Why does the author include the measurement 30 centimeters? So let's look at it. He says the device is a flock of 14 birds carry data loggers. The device's GPS determined each bird's flight position to within 30 centimeters with an accelerometer. Now, why tell me that the device, this is just setting up the study. This is how many birds, and this is how accurate their device was. So to demonstrate the accuracy. It's not giving you data about the flapping yet. This is setting up the experiment, all right? 27, 28, another set of double questions. Could have been tricky, but really wasn't. They ask about the geese, pelicans, and storks. They're really only mentioned once in the passage. And it says the findings likely apply to other long-winged birds, such as pelicans, storks, and geese. So right off that quote, we know two things. That the findings probably apply to these birds, and that they also have long wings, just like, I guess, the ipsises. They don't give us this quote as the option. They give us right after that smaller birds create more complex wakes, aka these long-winged ones make the same kind of wakes as our ipsis. They create a similar wake, and line 47 to 48. What is the main idea of the 7th paragraph? This is classic in a science passage. Scientists do not know how birds find that sweet spot. They suspect that they align themselves either by sight or by sensing the air currents through their feathers. Alternatively, they may move. They plan to investigate further. It's just showing where the research needs to go. This is what we've done so far, and this is where we need to be. So that's future research, and that's a classic SAT question. Aerodynamic sweet spot, it just means that there is an optimal, right? There's a sweet spot between how fast I go to help the most of you, right? So the sweet spot is 63. So that's to show that there is a position that has the least amount of resistance. All right, let's go to question number 31. As used in line 72, ripple most nearly means. They say they wonder if a mistake made by the leader can ripple through the rest of the flock, can spread. Somebody said fluctuate. Can spread to the rest of the members. If one guy messes up, what will happen to all of the rest of them? All right. Next, we are going to go to passage number 4, the dual passage, and I'll talk some strategy with you. It's a little bit of a different kind of passage, a little bit of a different kind of strategy. I might have a whole dual passage video. Maybe I'll have a link to that of this passage, but let's go over this one first. If you haven't done it, pause the video. Do it now, and then we will jump in. Passage number 4, Real SAT 7. Dual passage, link in the bio. Well, not bio, description. Instagram terms, I don't know. All right. Now, when you do the dual passage, a couple of pieces of strategy. Okay. Step 1: instead of reading both passages and then answering the questions, we're going to read one passage, answer questions. Read the second passage, answer the questions on it. All right. That's tip number 1. That way, and then you'll answer the ones on both. So it'll be on passage 1, 3 questions, on passage 2, 3 questions, and then 4 comparing them. Step 1. Step 2. Usually when we read SAT passages, it's not so important that you understand every word, that you get the main idea. In the dual, the main idea becomes central. So figure out the main idea. Do they agree? Do they disagree? All of that stuff. Number 3, beware of the way that the main idea is disguised with words like but. Okay, what I'm going to do now with you guys is I'll quickly read through these passages. Even if you read through it on your own, I think it'll be helpful just to have me go through it, show you how I read it, and understand the main idea. Okay? I have shown how democracy destroys or modifies inequalities in society, but is that all, or does it not ultimately affect the greatest inequality of man and woman? I believe that social changes which bring nearer the level of father and son, the master and servant, the superiors and inferiors, will raise women. So it sounds like he's pro-raising women, right? But, always the but. Dual passage, and I'll make a whole video on this probably, showing how often they use the but to confuse you. But here more than ever, I feel the necessity of making myself clearly understood. For there's no subject in which people don't know what's going on more. Okay? There are people in Europe, and again, this is his opinion, no, this is the people in Europe's opinion, confounding the sexes would make man and woman alike. They would give both the same functions, impose on both the same duties, give them the same rights, mix their pleasures. It may readily be conceived that by attempting to mix one sex to the other, both are degraded. That's the key. That's his opinion. Okay, that's the main idea. It is not thus that the Americans understand democracy. That's not what Americans. We don't, not like the Europeans. They admit that as nature has appointed such a wide difference between men and women, that's important, right? And that the Americans have applied to the sexes a political economy. Political economy means instead of just using economics to decide who gets which job, politics decides it. By carefully dividing the duties of man from those of woman, so that society could be better off as a whole. Passage 1. Let's look at some of the questions. So he's against women's rights. Or not against it, but we're different. We have different jobs, and we should force those on as a government. That would be very controversial today, obviously, right? As used in line 9, raise most nearly means is just elevate, or raise women, elevate them. I think most people get that right. 33 and 34, what does he imply about the treatment of women as identical? And we saw this line already, right? In 22 to 24, he says that would be devastating, that both would be degraded. Both sexes are greatly harmed. 33b and 34c. On to passage number 2 in this duel. I'm going to read through it and then we'll go to the questions. As society was constituted until the last few generations, inequality was its very basis. association grounded in equal rights hardly existed. To be equal was enemies. There's no such thing as equality in the world at all. Two persons could hardly cooperate or meet in any relations without the law making one superior. Now, mankind have outgrown this state, and now we tend to substitute a just equality. But, again, above, of all relations, that between men and women, finally getting to gender, and we'll get back to this, being the nearest and most intimate, connected with the strongest emotions, it's going to be last to get rid of the differences in inequality. For in proportion to the strength of a feeling, however strong an emotional feeling is, the tenacity with which it clings. And then he says, let every occupation be open to all. There's no need to fear. Women will take out a man's job if men do them better. But to interfere beforehand by an arbitrary limit and declare that people have to stick to certain jobs, not only is it an injustice, a detriment to society, but it provides that sexes are fettered. It's unhelpful. All right. So clear. I think that's the position that more people would take today. Definitely, all jobs should be open to both, and whoever's better is better. Even conservatives now would argue just that we shouldn't have affirmative action where we're giving more jobs to women to make up. I'm not trying to get controversial or anything like that. I'm just giving you the context. But here they're arguing about if we should keep women out of certain jobs. And that's not something that would be acceptable now. In passage 2, or maybe some of you think that. DM me. I'm joking. In passage 2, Mills most strongly suggests, DM me, I don't even use Instagram. In passage 2, Mills most strongly suggests that gender roles are resistant to change because so a lot of you for 36 chose A and A. 37A, 36A, and I'll show you why. As society was constituted, inequality was its basis. So you said, why is gender roles resistant? Why won't it change? Because inequality is at the basis of society, right? Now, the problem is that it doesn't specifically talk about gender roles. This is why inequality is difficult to change, not why gender roles are. But the line that finally talks about that is the relationship between men and women. The reason that one is hard to throw off is because it's connected with great emotions. And because in proportion to the strength of a feeling, however strong some people feel about something, that's the tenacity with which it clings, why it won't change. It clings on to its old way of being because men and women, the relationships are so deep. So 37 is C in proportion to the emotions, like we said. And then 36 is going to be B, that they're deeply entrenched. Got to be very careful on the question there. Make sure you read it. Oh, I skipped 35. If you were annoyed at me for skipping 35, dominion in 53. Dominion of the strongest, not ownership or territory, just supremacy, that one's in charge, right? So that's all. 38 is a question on both, so already we're on the both. Now, what would both agree? Now, some of you might say that it's unlikely to provide benefit that outweigh their cost, but passage 2 would disagree with that. He says that there is a benefit. We got to get rid of these gender. So passage 2 would disagree. At odds with democracy, passage 2 would definitely disagree with that. They both talk about it as part of a broad shift. One talks about it here, how inequality is breaking down, and passage 1 talks about it here, how democracy destroys inequalities. It's part of a greater context. It's furnishing a context, in the words of the SAT. It's giving a broader context. 39 and 41 are identical questions. It's asking how passage 1 would reply to these lines in passage 2, that every occupation should be open to all. A lot of you picked that it's persuasive in the abstract but difficult to implement in practice. I don't know why. I think you just don't know what that means. Like, oh, the abstract, but we can't really implement it. What does that mean? That means that it's persuasive. We just can't do it. But passage 1 wouldn't say that. He'd say it's a bad idea. It's ill-advised. But it's consistent with a view held by some other advocates of gender equality. And those some others are the Europeans, right? So he talks about that position, and we looked at that. So that's how we would respond. 40, I think, is easy. The answer is A, that the first passage believes that position has to do with sex, and Mills believes that it should be just by ability. And then 41 is asking how passage 2 would respond to these lines in passage 1, the idea of political economy, which I explained, but what you could see here is carefully dividing the duties of men and women. Passage 2 does not like that. He says that it prevents men and women from developing to their potential. You could see that at the end of passage 2. Doesn't help the cause. Further the cause means help. Get rid of gender equality. It doesn't do that. All right. Next, we're going to jump into the final passage on this SAT, passage number 5, science passage. If you didn't do it, pause the video, do it now, and then we will dive right in. Passage number 5, the final passage of Real SAT number 7. Make sure you did it. Let's do it. How Higgs's boson was found. This was one boring theory, but basically it discusses how there was this idea that Higgs came up with, or there was always this mathematical equation that defined these particles, but then when you started to give the mass, it messed everything up, and Higgs said, well, we should just say that the mass comes from the environment, that way we could keep our formulas and still accept the idea that they have mass. And then the author talks about how it gained acceptance, and how by the time he was in school in the 80s, it was accepted even though it had not been proven, and how that happens in physics from time to time, that an equation is so convincing that we just accept it. All right, interesting stuff. Let's jump into the questions. So over the course of the passages, the main focus shifts from, and some of you picked that it goes from a review of Higgs's work to a contextualization within Higgs's era. Problem is that the end goes outside of Higgs's era. It's not only about Higgs's era. It's not a technical account to then getting broad to it aimed at a broader audience. It's a explanation of the field and then the response. That's the second half. The analogy of the ping pong ball. This is very similar to the few other questions we had, the quotes and the parenthetical. Why bring up this ping pong ball? It's to give us an idea. Think of a ping pong ball submerged in water, showing that the mass comes from the environment. So it's to clarify this concept. How can mass come from an environment? So that's number 43. Number 44, he explains why it was initially rejected. So you have to find where it was rejected, and it's pretty obvious. It's in here that it was rejected. Why? Not because it had an error, but because the premise of something invisible seemed like overwrought speculation. What's overwrought speculation? It means that it had little empirical basis, had no proof, just seemed speculative. So 44D and 45. The author notes that one reason Higgs' theory gained acceptance, and now we want to know when it gained acceptance, and that's the next paragraph. But Higgs persevered, and physicists who took the time realized that it was a stroke of genius. Why? Because it allowed them to have their cake and eat it too. We could keep the nice equations and leave the dirty work to the environment. So 47 is going to be 55 to 63, I guess. Yeah, this whole paragraph. And the answer is because it let scientists accept two conditions that were previously irreconcilable: their cake and eat it. You could have the math equation as one thing, and then you could have the concept of the mass as another thing. Okay, and that's the only one that talks about why it was accepted, really. I mean, maybe some of you picked 47D, that on occasion that happens, that math equation tells such a convincing tale that they could become entrenched. But then none of these choices really work with that, so that's why that doesn't work. 48, he uses which technique to advance the main point. So that's here when he talks about his personal experience. A lot of you said that, like he describes his own education, but it's not showing how physics changed during his career. It's from before his career. Or he provides autobiographical details. That's good, but Higgs' theory wasn't confirmed. It's just accepted. He contrasts the status at two time periods. No, so he recounts his personal experience to illustrate a characteristic of the discipline of physics. 48. And the characteristic of the discipline of physics is this point here, that mathematical tales could, he says, on occasion this happens in physics. 49, established just means validated in 77, that it was established, experimentally validated. What passage does the graph serve? So let's look at the graph now. It just shows other experiments and then when they were confirmed, years to confirmation. So Higgs was still not confirmed. It was just accepted in the 80s. But these things were confirmed. So it doesn't show that it was typical. These are all proven. It gives a broader context. I think I just emphasized that on the last passage, right? That's common for the SAT. 51, which statement is best supported by the data in the graph? So W and Z were proposed and confirmed at the same time. W and Z proposed, confirmed, same time. Yeah. 52, based on the graph, which is most analogous to Higgs' theory in the 1980s and the author's depiction? So first you have to know what happened in the 80s. You go back and it says that in the 80s it was accepted, bought into the idea. So now let's go back to the graph. In the 80s, Higgs' experiment was accepted, but was it proven? No, it wasn't. So what would be comparable to that? One of these being accepted before they were confirmed. So this being disputed in the 60s, that is not disputed. No, we're looking for proven. In 2012, they doubted the tau neutrino. Well, that makes sense because it was proven already in 2000. No physicists consider the possibility of WZ. That's irrelevant because that's before it was proven. Most physicists in the 40s believed in the electron neutrino. Oh yeah, that's similar to believing in Higgs in 80. It's before it was confirmed. So that's it. We really just finished the entire real SAT 7. Hopefully I'll be making videos like this on all the SATs. Maybe I'll charge you, or maybe I will have them for free. I'm not sure, I guess. But you know, this is something that we do. This is very important, to keep up the good work. And I appreciate you taking the time for yourself. Really, this test is all for you. So if you're pushing yourself, you're motivated, you're working, I'm proud of you. There's a lot of other junk to watch on YouTube, I know that. So good job.